For this last bit, I'll be doing some real-time changing of parameters in this gestural score, and we'll talk through the consequences of those changes. Here we see an alveolar stop with glottal opening lasting longer than the stop closure. So this looks like a voiceless alveolar stop, or t. The movement of the tongue body says velar narrow, which means that the back of the tongue is moving high in the back of the mouth. In other words, a high back vowel like oo. At the same time, the lips are listed as bilabial approx, which should make you think of a w sound. This is intended to indicate that the lips are rounded, which they should be during the production of the vowel oo. Now, if the velar narrow and the bilabial approximate gestures start at the beginning of the word, the result will be that lip rounding will be present during the production of the t sound. This is often referred to as an anticipatory assimilation. T, which has no lip rounding as a part of its underlying articulation, is being produced with lip rounding in this production, as a result of anticipating the rounding that will be necessary for the upcoming vowel. Similarly, the back of the tongue can easily be in position for the vowel oo before the t sound is actually produced. Finally, you can see that this word also ends with an alveolar stop gesture. The glottis is not open. This means that the vocal folds are vibrating, so the sound is voiced. Therefore, this word has segments that are t, oo, and d. But remember, the lip rounding on t doesn't have to be there. What if the bilabial approximant and velar narrow gestures started later, maybe even after the actual release of the alveolar stop? The result then would be that the vowel would start without being a high back rounded vowel. In fact, it would likely glide into that position, and the initial part of the vowel would likely sound like a vowel produced with the tongue tip near the alveolar ridge and with no lip rounding. Well, the vowel with the tongue tip near the alveolar ridge is the high front vowel E. And if we think about this as a gliding action, we can remember that when E glides into another sound, it's essentially the glide y. So this production would be produced with a palatal off glide and might sound like tude. A bit unusual, perhaps, but it can also be heard as characteristic of some dialects of English. Next, if we change the opening gesture so that it ends at the same time as the tongue tip gesture ends, then there's no room for aspiration. By the time the tongue tip releases the built-up air pressure, the glottis is already closed and vocal fold vibration is essentially beginning. And this is basically a voice onset time of 0 milliseconds. The vocal folds start vibrating at the same time that the oral stop closure is released. In American English, a stop produced with coincident closure of the vocal folds will have no aspiration, and we'll perceive such a production as having a voiced alveolar stop. This word would be dude. And lastly, if we add another gesture, a velar opening gesture, then we can see that early opening of the velum would produce a slightly nasalized vowel, and then the nasal consonant n. This word would be dune. And if we return the glottis gesture to its original timing, such that the initial stop is aspirated, this would be the word tune. Gestural phonology has done a remarkable job of showing how multiple different productions can be accounted for simply by varying the relative timing of the movements of independent articulators by very small amounts. In some cases, these differences result in allophonic variations, such as that between the non-palatalized tude and the palatalized tude. At other times, the differences might cross phonemic boundaries, creating the effect of sounds changing from one category to another, as in the difference between tune and dune. Whether a given articulatory difference results in allophonic change or phonemic change is sometimes a reasonably random effect. In therapeutic terms, this can work to our benefit, as it can sometimes be a very small movement change that'll result in a client being able to represent a very important new category of sounds. I find myself creating gestural scores all the time when I consider how to think through a given client's speech errors, and in particular, what I might be able to help the client alter in order to produce the desired target sound.